Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about tests and sufficient tests. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, would you say that there are scenarios where you may not be able to avert a production issue as a software engineer even if you had sufficient tests? Well, I would say so. There are many things that you can't capture with a test. Doesn't really matter much in terms of what type of test that you have. Uh, there's not. Just as an example, one of the things that you will probably never be able to fully prevent is a production runtime only situation where basically you have an issue that could only technically happen in production. An example of that would be integrations. So for those of you who work in distributed systems, you probably sooner or later will find that you're gonna have to connect to some other system or service that doesn't fall within your own ownership. And when that thing goes down, I mean, then there's not much you can do apart from, you can do preventative things like graceful error handling and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the system is broken. It's sort of the same thing if your cloud provider goes down or something like that. There's nothing you can do. It's down, and that's pretty much it, really. The thing that you can do to prevent such things is to test in production, which is a concept that it's a little bit. Let's just say that there's a few philosophies on this. I mean, the common thing that people usually do and say is that they want to have test environments and stuff like that, and testing in production is frowned upon in some cases. Some people are very anti it. And I even remember once upon a time at my last job, I explained to a coworker who said that we should be testing in production in a system that we were using, and I said that yes, we can test in production, but you should understand the cost and impact of doing such a thing. And because the issue with testing in production is that if it's done incorrectly, it can potentially in of itself cause problems. An example would be if you're testing in production, you have to have an idea of how to deal with data being persisted, for example. So a common one is that you want to test the order flow or something like that on your system, and then your test system, like an end-to-end test, if you run that in, say, a QA environment or a test environment or something like that, well, then that's not a problem because usually you can just remove the data after you're done. But if you do that in production, well, then you're basically really like putting a real order, so you have to have an idea of how to. Well, you can of course just create a bunch of fake data, but you need an account, you need to add the order, etc., etc. And then of course if you have third parties like partners or something like that, who are in turn getting communication when an order is placed, well, then that adds another layer of complexity. Now, I can't go through because to me this has become a solved issue because I've learned the well I'm not going to say that it's perfect, but I've figured out more or less how to solve problems like that. So that you can do persistent types of operations, but at the very least I try to tell people that doing read-only operations in production is a very good thing, because you can think, in my opinion at the very least, you can almost think of it as a little bit as doing a health check. So the common health check that most people do is that they have something like Pingdom or something like that that's just pinging a certain website, right? And to me, that is like the basics, just to make sure that the box or like the website is upright. But if you run your end-to-end tests that actually go and does all this, generates traffic on different features, that's in my opinion even better, because now you're actually interacting with the system as you would if you were a user, and it in effect works the same way as a health check. So if you could limit yourself to only that, you could at the very least validate that the production system is working. But as I said, even when I do things like that, in the systems that I've had that have this problem with integrations, for example, there's always something. Like it will find the issue and you can probably go and fix it before the users are affected by it, but at the end of the day it's still a production issue. And so you have to have options about rolling back, etc., etc., so forth. But then, there are situations where even if you wanted to test before you deploy, it's practically impossible for you to do so. Another example is if you are going to set up, like restructure the way your infrastructure works, or maybe you're doing a database migration or something like that. These situations are usually very difficult to fully test before you ship it into production, and they usually have a lot of impact. If you update, for example, like we had an issue the other week where we updated the TLS certificates for a website that I was maintaining, and it turns out that we had all these references in the code which actually just exploded because we actually forgot that this caused it basically became a course situation for some of the websites that we had, because someone had hard coded in a specific domain, etc., etc., all of these sorts of things, right? And there is no way for you to even create sufficient tests for that, because and this is why I tell people, like, there is no situation where you can go without the production issue. Trying to, like, if you're scared of making a production situation occur, then this job is not for you, because it is scary. Everybody's scared of it, and they don't really like and it's actually the number one problem, in my opinion, at the very least, when it comes to release efficiency. People are scared of releasing things into production, and that's why I try to fight it as much as possible. My tip to people who want to fight that fear is usually not to try to create sufficient tests, quote unquote. Test as a way to reduce the amount of risk that you have of releasing a production issue or something like a bug or something like that. But my suggestion to you is to create a rollback and a deployment strategy, usually with rollbacks and feature flagging and things like that, or like if you're using front-end application, trying to limit the impact of an error in production. Like in my favorite one in React is error boundaries, so it's a very good system. For example, it's a very good feature of React. These sort of tools you can use to limit blast radius, and so that people who do actually create a production issue can very quickly fix it, because as I said, it is basically impossible for you to test all the possible things that could go wrong. So what I want you to take away from this is that, of course, there are many scenarios where something can break in production, even if you had tests for it. As I was saying, as one example is integrations, because when you connect to a third-party system, they might break something on their side, and then all of the, it's pretty much broken. And so I am a firm believer in adopting the same sort of philosophy as data centers in many cases have, at least the ones like the idea being that instead of trying to create a system like a data center that never has any breakages in the hardware, just understand that hardware will break, and then instead optimize your setup so that if a certain rack or like some card somewhere breaks, that doesn't really matter, because you're automatically flowing over the traffic and processing power to some other place within the data center, and then you can replace the component and continue on as before, right? And as a software developer, I think that you should adopt the same sort of mentality, where the idea is that test is a supplement that you add so that you reduce the chance of breaking something or creating a bug, and you should be writing tests. But it's also, that's just one part of it. The other part is, as I said, make the cost of a production issue very cheap for you. Make it a small thing that isn't really a big deal, and if you can achieve that state, which you can, there's many ways of doing it, using things like rollbacks and feature flagging, for example, are just a few things that you could be doing, then at the very least you have reduced down the problem to its cheapest state, and that I've found it to be a more efficient way of solving problems in production. Have a great day.